I know, right? I'm going. We're going. Good evening, sisters, and welcome to our Evening Relief Society. I'm Kandace Durfee. I'm the first counselor in Pella 2nd Ward. And tonight we are going to talk about our prompt question. And November is our month. So because it's Thanksgiving month, we decided that we would talk about family recipes and Thanksgiving traditions. So I'm going to start with mine, and then I'll introduce everyone else and they will let you in on their recipes. I'm going to start tonight by introducing to you my maternal grandmother. This is her. I don't know if you probably can't see. I'm going to come close. Okay. This is my grandma and grandpa when they were young. She was a seamstress. She sewed, and she had made their shirts that night, and they won first prize at the dance that night for the best outfit. So she was pretty proud of that. Anyway, that's one of my favorite pictures of her. Okay. So my grandmother was born in Elmo, Idaho. She was born Idris Ward. She's a twin. And she grew up in Elmo, and then she attended college in Albion at Albion Normal School, and she got her teaching degree. She went on to teach, she was the English teacher and the librarian at Raft River High School for many, many, many years. But her biggest passion was she was the speech and drama teacher. And she loved putting on plays and directing them and taking kids to speech contests. And she was pretty tough to beat. Usually her kids got superiors. She loved kids and she loved doing that. Later on, Raft River High School built a new auditorium, and they named it the Idris Sears Auditorium. And they named that after her in her honor. And there's a whole trophy case thing right outside the auditorium that talks about her and has her picture. And she was kind of notorious out there for that. She was very, very good. She wasn't very tall. She was about 5 feet. She swore she was 5 feet tall, but I don't think she was quite 5 feet tall. She was a little shorter than that. But what I remember most about her is that it was so much fun to go to her house because it always smelled good and everything tasted good. And it was fun to go there, and especially for holidays. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our Thanksgiving traditions and going up there. So I remember mostly that her Thanksgiving table always looked beautiful. The dishes, the centerpiece, the glasses, she was always very fancy, and everything was set so beautifully. And I always try to make my holiday tables kind of look a little bit like hers did because I thought that was so much fun. But our favorite Thanksgiving side dish by far is dried corn. So I'm going to show it to you. This is dried corn. Maybe I'll take the left so you can see it better. And then kind of, it looks a little bit like popcorn. Anyway, this is dried corn, and when we were kids, we referred to it as dried up corn. So it's kind of an old, I think it's an old pioneer recipe because I know other people have this recipe. I've heard about it from other people. And I always kind of thought it might have come somehow from the Indians. I'm not sure if it's an Indian recipe, but I always thought it was. So I'm going to kind of read you what I have to do to dry the corn in the first place. So when it's corn season, you have to cut the corn off the cob, and she didn't get it wet first. She didn't even wash it. You have to dry it. So you want as little water as possible. So I'm going to, this is the recipe. It was 16 cups of corn, a half a cup of cream, a half a cup of sugar, and a fourth a cup of salt. And you mix that all together. You stir it up really good. And then you put it on a cookie sheet in the oven, and you bake it on 250, like on convect. And the idea is you're trying to dry up all the moisture. You're trying to get it dried. So I usually set the timer and I stir it like every hour, every half an hour. I kind of stir it around. You don't want it to burn. I mean, it's on low heat, but you're just trying to dry it up. So I usually stir it about every half an hour, and I think I leave it in there. She says 3 hours. You just have to watch it and see, how dry it's getting or how moist it still is. You don't want it to be too moist. It gets kind of sticky. All the moisture comes out and it's kind of sticky. Once you get it to where it's pretty dry, you put it in a pillowcase. She hung hers on the clothesline. We hang ours in the shop, and Brett puts a fan. He plugs in a fan and blows air at it. And you have to go in about every twice a day and sort of stir it. You kind of mush it around inside the pillowcase so it doesn't get moldy. You have to kind of move it around a little bit. And it takes about 2 months. It takes a long time. And it dries. It eventually dries. And you get what's in this jar right here. And I haven't ever kept mine. I've always just kept mine in the pantry in a jar. But once you go to cook it, so this is what we made for Thanksgiving dinner, and it was always gone first. We could never make enough dried up corn because that was everybody's favorite. So you put it in water. You have to reconstitute it. You put it in water and you cook it. Really, they started that before they started the turkey. The corn takes the longest. It rehydrates. And you have to simmer it in water, and it takes about 4 or 5 hours. And then what you do is you mix in some thickening, kind of like your gravy thickening. You mix that in, and then just a little bit. I put a little bit of half and half in mine, but you don't want it to be too thin. The idea is for it to be thick. And the longer that it cooks, the better it is. So you want it to be thick and cook a long time. And it is so good. It is absolutely our favorite thing. We had to start making more of that because it was always gone first, but that's the tradition at our house. So I'm going to introduce Linda. She is the second counselor in the Relief Society. She's going to talk about her recipe ideas. And after her, we'll have Kristi. She's the secretary, Kristi Thompson. And then Kalene Baldwin is our president, and she will kind of wrap things up. Here, let me look.
Hi, I picked this up from my niece because I didn't get one done, but all the grandkids love Mom's rice pudding. And so she put this together, and it has the recipe in my mom's handwriting. And she wrote in the little deal, "Grandma loves me more. She makes me rice pudding." And I had taken this picture of Mom. I had her at my house for the weekend one day, and I was baking. So I give her the bowl to lick with a spatula, and I took a picture when she wasn't looking. And so Kelly Dawn wanted to know if I had a picture of her, and so I gave her this one, but she put it in, it was color, but she put it in black and white. And then she fixed this together to set on her counter. And some of our traditions is clear back about 45 years ago, I started making pumpkin rolls and made them for all my kids for Christmas. And then it went to all the grandkids and everything until I was doing about 50 a year. So last year was the first year I didn't do any. And then we get together and do the apple pies too, about that many, with my daughter and her daughter. And then we have 7 of us getting together doing them, and my granddaughter, she's one of the apple peelers. And we'd do those and give for gifts and just to have on hand to freeze them. And then I've done the peanut butter cups, or excuse me, peanut butter Easter eggs that I've done for all the kids and grandkids and well, the whole families. And I've done them for about 45 years every year for all of them. And that just got to be a tradition. And so those are just part of the things that we've done as a family. Okay, thank you.
Tonight I brought for you my Andrus family cookbook. And this was put together by my mom and her sisters. My uncle drew all the artwork in it. So there's little pictures and stuff in here all the way through. And it is just recipes that they have put together from my mom's family and her sisters that they have enjoyed. My mom's mom ran a reception center for a while. So there's her recipe for the carrot cake that they would serve and things like that. But one of my favorite recipes that's in here is from my aunt, and she makes peanut butter Rice Krispies with chocolate chips melted on top. And I have since learned those are called scotcheroos. But I showed up at my mom's house one time and there was a pan of those sitting there. And I said, "Oh my heck, I love those so much." And she goes, "I know. Charlene knew that you were coming down here and she made those for you." So ever since then, it's been really special to have that recipe and teach it to my kids. And it's really fun to be able to go through this and show my kids and make things for them that my grandma made for my mom and her sisters and that they have made for their families. So Okay. I don't know if you can see this cute little picture, but this here is my grandmother and 3 of her sisters. And those were just the first 4 sisters that were born in that family. They ended up having 7 girls in a row, and then 2 boys, and then another girl. So like most girl families, they stayed really close and just had a wonderful time growing up together. This is my grandma is Delpha, and her sister that was just younger than her is Artella. And they stayed particularly close because they were both widowed in their 40s. And so they were kind of chums together and did a lot of things together. So because of that, I knew my Aunt Artella very well. They grew up in Archer, Idaho, which is a beautiful area, but it's got very rocky farm ground. It's kind of between Idaho Falls and Rexburg. And it was kind of hard to eke a living out of that land. And because of that, the kids had to really pitch in. This was 1917 was the year my grandma was born. And so times were hard back then anyway, but they really had to work with 10 kids and everything to make a living. Most of the time that my grandma was growing up, they had 2 bedrooms in their home with all those children, and they would all squunch in there together. And they also boarded the school teacher most of the time in the living room. So it was just a real different time. One of the things, these sisters all got together, all 7 of them eventually, and wrote their family history. And so we have this adorable history of their little family. One of the things that they wrote, they said, one of the things we especially remember about Mother and Daddy, they always called their dad Daddy, is how good they were to everyone, whether it be relatives or strangers. If they needed a bed or a meal, the folks took them in. And I can't even imagine that with a little 2-bedroom house. But she said often there were just blankets and quilts piled up on the kitchen floor, and whoever needed a place to stay could stay at their house. They worked very hard. So from the time they were little, there were a lot of raspberry patches in their area, and people had big, huge raspberry patches. And so their mom would sign them up to pick raspberries. And so in the summer, they would wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, or as soon as the sun came up. And as soon as you were old enough to know a ripe berry, you got put on the team, and they would go, and their mother would take them, and she would pick with them, and they would pick all day long, stop for and eat their little lunch that they brought with them, and then pick until it was dark. And this is what they did from about middle of June until August, she said. And then they would work in the spring thinning beets, which a lot of you probably know a little bit about. But she said, this is a job that defies all description. But here again, Mom and sometimes Daddy would be right out there in the fields with us. We would start about the middle of May, and we thin beets on almost everybody's ground in Lyman, Archer, and Sunnydale. If you were too young to use the hoe by yourself to block and thin, Daddy would block, and you would crawl behind him thinning the beets. Our knees would get so sore from crawling up and down the rows. The Mom would take an old sheepskin coat and cut out patches and sew in our jeans to help protect our knees. So I can just imagine these sweet little girls crawling along thinning those beets. They worked so hard. They picked potatoes in the fall, and that's how they earned the money for their school clothes as well. But this was also a family that knew how to play, and they had so much fun together. She talks about they would, in the evenings, turn rope in the kitchen, and their dad would get on one end of the rope and turn, and they would all jump, and their mother would jump with them, and they would do all the little rhymes that went along with that, and just thoroughly enjoyed that. They also would hang up a sheet and put on plays and dance recitals and things there in the kitchen on their little stage. That they said, one thing we'll always remember is Mom reading to us just about every night. We would hurry to do the dishes, fill the wood box with wood, be sure the reservoir was filled with water, get homework out of the way, and then we would wash some apples and pop a big pan of popcorn and sometimes make a batch of candy. We would pull our chairs up to this in a circle, and Mom would sit on the oven door of the old cook stove and read books. She said, I'll never forget the way Mom could read a story. She could read with so much expression that you could see the pictures in your mind, living it right along with her reading. If it was a sad story, there would be several sobbing children. In fact, we remember sometimes she would have to stop reading until we could get control of ourselves. So they just had a really fun time together. And it talks in that story about making candy, and that's something that they continue to do throughout their lives. My grandma's candy specialty was fudge, and she made fudge every Christmas. And our Pella, this little one here, made peanut brittle, and they were well known for those. One after our Pella passed away, my sister texted us one Christmas and said, "Does anybody have Artella's peanut brittle recipe? I want to make peanut brittle." And none of us did. But I started thinking, I remembered she had given me, when I got married, the Archer Ward Cookbook. And so I thought, just maybe it might be in there. And so I got it out and looked through, and sure enough, there was her recipe for peanut brittle. So we've got it. And I've made it several times. It's a fun recipe because it doesn't use a candy thermometer, which is always tricky for me. You just watch for the color to start to turn. And so it's an easy but fun recipe, and always reminds us of our Aunt Artella. My grandmother's fudge recipe, however, she had no daughters and 2 sons, and nobody saved that recipe. That recipe is gone. We do not have it. So my suggestions for tonight are: get those recipes while people are still alive, write them down, make sure you have them, especially if there's not a daughter in the family who's already got them. Another suggestion I have with recipes is a lot of us use Pinterest these days for our recipes. And if the person that posted that originally closes down their account, then that recipe is also gone. So don't rely on the computer or Pinterest to save your recipes for you. I went to do my jalapeno peach jelly this fall, and the recipe was gone. So I had to make it up again, and I think I got it close. But anyway, make sure you have your recipes written down, especially the ones that are important to your family. I also brought tonight peanut butter crunchies, which are one of my mom's recipes. You can tell it's an old recipe because it has maraschino cherries in it, which I don't think anybody ever uses anymore. We still make it almost every year, somebody in our family at Christmas time, but nobody puts the cherries in. But I did put them in tonight just because it's tradition. So make it authentic. So that is all of our ideas for tonight. We thank you for letting us talk to you, and we hope that you take a minute to talk to your family about some family recipes and get those written down so that you have them to pass on to your children and the stories behind them. Thank you.